We're getting ready to do a gear set in this rear end. We're going to go from a 287, a tall gear, to a 354, numerically larger but a shorter gear. But we took the rear end out to paint it. We decided to take all the internals out so it's lighter.
Never knock it. Oh.
So, listen, the spline's very tight. Trying to keep these shims. You can see there's an inside and outside race. I'm going to flip this.
I'm gonna try catching the edge of the race down here. Oh, that's kind of hard. So you're gonna hold it, you don't want to hog into the side, but just and you go to the other side.
It looks like the race is starting to walk down a little bit.
There's just a little edge to catch on.
Most rear ends have the bearing immersed in the gear oil, but this one does not. Come on.
Yep.
The bearing is going to sit right in this area, and the seal was in this area.
Yeah.
So you can see that that bearing was actually greased before it was installed. But the new bearing is going to be a sealed bearing. We got it all taped up now, plugged up as best as possible.
Just use the paint cup here.
And we're going to scrape it, wire wheel it, and then probably wash it.
Pressure wash it, and you cannot get these things clean enough. You think you got it clean it more, because any kind of grit that gets in the bearings and stuff is going to chew everything apart. So we're going to be pressure washing it and using hot soapy water. What was it, 2 minutes in water? It's already rusting out. You got to blow this thing out as quick as you can.
This is the old race for the pinion bearing. You can see how deep that groove is where it gets pressed in. The shims go on that groove for this rear end. And since this is a press fit, I'm going to take the OD of this old race down a little bit, so I can use it for fitting purposes for the new gear set. Not sure how well this is going to work. It's no longer a press fit. I'll use this for checking purposes only because I won't have to press it in and press it out. So it should make shim changes on that pinion pretty easy. When we final assemble it, I'll use the press fit race. There are a couple ways on how you can set pinion depth in a rear end. Either shims go behind the head bearing race, brings it out this way, or shims go between the head bearing and the pinion itself. This pinion here has a shim in it, it looks like, so I'm going to press that bearing off and take a look. But this rear end is designed to be shimmed with shims behind the race. And if I were shimming between the bearing and the pinion, I would do the same thing. I'd take a die grinder and a sandpaper roll and open up the inside of that bearing so it would slip on and off without a press, and use that bearing as a checking bearing. final assembly with the actual bearings, of course. So to get this bearing off here and see what shim I got, I'm going to use a bearing separator on the press. I doubt if bearings like this. That's why it's a good idea to set yourself up a checking bearing. I'm not using this bearing or this pinion. I just want to get the shim out. See what we got here. The old crush sleeve is still on it. These are only used once. When we do our pattern checking, we won't have this in there. Then we do final assembly, we'll put a brand new one in there. And I was mistaken, there is no shim in here. If it were the type of rear end where you put shims in between here to set the pinion depth, you definitely want a checking bearing. You take your sandpaper roll in here, open this up, and then it would slip on and off without a press. Here's the bearing and shim kit I got for this rear end. I have been saving the shims from the rear ends I've been doing, and it's always good to have some on hand. We found this one when we took the rear end apart. Someone had shimmed the head bearing with a partial piece of metal. This is the new gear set I'm going to use. Before I go any further, I'm going to count the number of ring gear teeth and divide by the number of pinion gear teeth to see that I have the correct ratio. So 39 divided by 11. So we're going to have like a 355 to 1 ratio with this. We're going to a numerically higher gear ratio, and you can just see how much smaller the 355 to 1 pinion is versus the 287 to 1 pinion. Comparing the ring gears, you can see how much thicker the new ring gear is compared to the old ring gear. I'm going to press the head bearing on here in a minute, but you can see these pieces are filthy, so I'm going to wash them up along with the carrier. I'm getting ready to press the head bearing on. I have a piece that fits on the inside of it, and this piece goes all the way down. I had another pipe, but it bottoms out part way. She's fully seated. If the ring gear doesn't come off easy here, I'll have to press it off. The bearing is actually pressed on past the carrier. Because of this awkward situation, I'm using my crappy bearing separator. I'm bringing my hand up through the bottom to catch the carrier. I'm going to go over both ring gear mating surfaces now with a little bit of sandpaper to make sure they don't have any raised burrs. Like this nick right here, for instance, I'll sand it flat so I don't have any run out. I'll wash this in some mineral spirits now and blow it off. Time to press the ring gear on. A little thread locker on all these bolts. There's still tension on the press. And I'm going to step torque all these bolts down. I'm getting ready to press this bearing on, and if you recall, it goes past the end here. I need something that hits on the inside of the bearing and goes around the outside of this. I'll cut the cage off the old bearing and take a die grinder with a sandpaper roll and open it up. It's cleaned up. It fits far enough on there now without a press that we can use it. So we get it pressed back to where the original was. I'm going to drive this race in now. It'd be nice to do it with a race driver, but I don't have one that perfectly fits. So I'm going to do it on the outside edge.
change sound when you buried it.
So when you heard that noise change, that's when this race came right to that edge here. So we know it's all the way in.
I'm going to use the same amount of shim that was with the old setup as a starting point behind my setup race. Our new bearing doesn't want to go on here too easy. Instead of forcing this on and off a bunch of times, we're going to make a setup bearing with this. I'll probably tape this all up so we don't get shavings in it, and then open it up with that sandpaper roll. We're going to put this together now and preload it a little bit. Putting it together with no seal in it at this point, and we're using the old nut. I've tightened it to where you can't bring this in and out. There's no play.
If you had a nut that wasn't crimped, it would make life a lot easier because just the torque required to turn that nut on being crimped, it's supposed to be a locking nut, it makes it more difficult.
We're going to replace our bearing cap or saddle bolts with ARP studs. We're putting these in just finger tight. When we took this round apart, there was a ton of carrier bearing preload on it. We couldn't get the original shims back in, so we've made a case spreader. For checking the pattern, we're going to use 0 carrier bearing preload. Then when we're all done, we're going to add some preload to the carrier bearings.
Whenever you put this on here, you should have a dial indicator on it when you're spreading these nuts to open this up a little. Don't go wild, you know. You're only supposed to go like a maximum of 10 thousandths. We're just trying to get the shims in there. There'd be no reason to go any further.
We got our dial indicator at about roughly 90 degrees to the tooth. We're taking a preliminary backlash check.
I'm gonna rotate it until I get up near where I'm at. I mean, near the pinion. Okay, now I'm gonna start putting drag on it. We're looking at the pattern, we're getting a full sweep, but then when you look at the back side, you can see it favors toward the back. And you'll hear this, and he's not happy with the amount of backlash. So we're gonna take the caps off, measure our shims, and we're gonna move it over a little bit.
We're probably going to take a shim out of here and try to add a slightly thicker one on this side, if we can squeeze it in there. So we took 10 off this shim pack. We had a 20 over here, hopefully we can fit this in. So when we took this rear end apart, we found that these caps are actually on upside down, and we think that this cap probably got replaced at some point, because you can see the up arrow needs to point down.
To properly have it so the shims don't hit, there's a chamfer. The caps can only go on one way.
So we've moved the carrier this way, 10 thousandths. We'll see what we get. Still feels like the backlash is a little loose.
Yeah.
We're doing our research here. There's a lot of different sources on contact patterns. But we're thinking we're pretty close. We're going to try to preload the carrier bearing on the left side with some shim with the spreader bar, and we're going to throw it all together and see what happens.
There.
So when you preload it, we're just going to try to add a little bit here, and then we're thinking it'll be pretty good. We're going to disassemble it now and then press the race in and put the pinion in. My bearing race driver doesn't fit the right way on this race either, but backwards it kind of works. Ended up using the same tool I used in my last rear end video, which can feel that the shims are in there tight now. That race is seated.
This one we had ground out, so when we were just playing with it, we could slide this on and off. But this is so much of a difference. He's gonna put this in the freezer overnight, and then we're gonna put this in the stove like right before I show up and I come to help him work on it. And then hopefully it'll just drop on, but otherwise I gotta make a piece of tubing that'll be this distance, and as you're threading it'll at least squish down evenly and get it started.
It's the next day. The pinion's ice cold. We got the bearing in the oven. We're gonna grab them, squirt some oil on them, and see if we can get it together. So the temperature trick didn't work that well. We had to use a spacer and the old nut to draw the bearing on, and once we ran out of room, we took this off and put the yoke in, drew it on some more, and then we hit a wall, the crush sleeve. So we're gonna take the yoke back off now and put the seal in, and we'll put the yoke back on and then go to crush the crush sleeve.
You never want to start anything dry. Pre-lube it with the same lube that's going to be inside the rear end.
Using the new nut this time. It takes big levers to crush the crush sleeve. So some people say you're never supposed to get a pipe wrench near our end. Well, this is all we got that's going to be able to do this. We're going to wrap it with a piece of sheet metal to try to prevent marring the yoke. Here's the other bar we're going to use. And once we start getting close, I have an inch-pound beam wrench to check the rotating torque.
You got it a lot.
Took up some.
Yeah, this is just a lot to manipulate here.
A plate with 4 holes would have been much nicer in a long bar.
Right. That's what I need for the day now.
You ready? Okay, I'm taking our bite. Is the plate on?
You still gonna have to go a lot more, don't you think?
So there's a little oil on these bearings. Yeah, we good. There's no preload on it yet.
This is for young men. Oh.
We carefully snuck up on it. We got the preload where we want it. The guy at ARP said to put some straight 30 on the threads here. So that's what we're going to use. We got our dial indicator set up across there. We're going to spread the case now a little bit. And this way we can keep an eye on what we're doing.
10.
Yeah, 10 maybe. That's 10. This is the pattern we ended up with. Here's the drive side. And there's the coast side. We got it up on the inside, that's where we want it. We're checking our final backlash here. On the side of the gear it said 6 thousandths. It's about what we got.
I'll just say that it's one of them jobs, even though you could have done 5 in your lifetime. There's such a span from one to the other, it's like starting all from scratch. When you take it to a guy that does this every day, they have these things together
you know, torn apart and back together in really fast time, but they charge you for it. And sometimes when you have a project, you want to know everything. You can say, I've had this thing apart from front to back. It's a learning experience, but you got to have patience. You should have two guys, because there's a lot of heavy stuff. Some people do it when they're, you know, on axle stands. We did it up here in the car. But no matter what you do, that tightening of that crush sleeve is a real job. And if you had it just on jack stands or whatever, the whole rear end would want to go around. It takes a lot of pressure to do that. And then trying to get these shims in there and moving it one way or the other and getting the pattern that you like and just trying to get them shims in there. It takes two guys because the carrier is heavy. So it's a two-man job.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching.